Hello, and welcome to New Scientist Weekly, your one-stop shop for the most fascinating science and technology news. I'm Timothy Revel in London.
And I'm Christy Taylor in New York. This week on the podcast, where the hobbit-sized humans of Flores might fit in our evolutionary family tree, why quantum telepathy might be a real-life way to gain advantage in the stock market, if that's your thing, and how to terraform Mars with teeny bits of iron.
Plus, what's really living in your microwave. But first, we've got amazing news this week for fans of giant holes in the Atlantic Ocean. Geologists are reporting having drilled the deepest hole ever drilled into Earth's mantle. At more than 1,200 meters deep, it's a pretty significant feat, and it could tell us a lot more about a layer of the Earth that we've struggled to observe directly in the past. Chen Lai is here to tell us all about it. Hi, Chen.
Hi.
So can we just start with a bit of context with all of this? My geology studies are a bit in my past, so can you just remind me a bit, what are the layers of Earth and how does the mantle fit in?
Yeah, great question. So Earth is generally made up of a few layers. So we have the solid outer layer known as the crust, the upper and lower mantle, and the outer and inner core. Most of the planet that we see and interact with is the crust, which can range between 4.8 to 69 kilometers in depth, or around 3 to 43 miles. Just beneath that is what's known as the mantle, which is, in terms of volume, what makes up most of our planet. The upper layer of this mantle is largely responsible for driving crucial planetary processes such as earthquakes, the water cycles, the creation of mountains and volcanoes, so it's all very important.
Okay, got it. The mantle is super important, but you said the crust, this top layer, can be tens of kilometers deep. So how have researchers actually managed to now reach the mantle?
Another great question. So you are right, the crust makes up the vast majority of the surface of the planet. But there are some pockets of the ocean where the upper mantle is exposed and therefore relatively easier to drill into. One of these areas is an underwater mountain located by the mid-Atlantic ridge, known as the Atlantis Massif. This is a super active region of the mantle where bits continuously float up, melt and sink and so on, which gives us lots of volcanoes on the seafloor. It's also close to a submarine field filled with lots of hydrothermal vents, which is where seawater seeps into the mantle, and as you peer deeper into the mantle, it gets hotter, and this heat produces chemical compounds such as methane, which is one idea as to where life on Earth came from. So all in all, lots of fascinating reasons to go looking for data.
Yeah, that mix of methane and heat and seawater has biologist's dream written all over it. So this is where the big hole gets drilled, right? Atlantis Massif?
Yep, so for all the interesting bits of science I already mentioned, the researchers really wanted to learn more about the region and decided to dig into the mantle at the Atlantis Massif with a drilling research vessel called the Geologists Resolution. Initially, the team only planned to dig just 200 meters into the mantle because that was the current record. But as they started drilling, things went much better than expected, and they decided to keep going until they reached a pretty whopping 1,268 meters.
Just an extra kilometer, no big deal, as you do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so they were very, very lucky. And after analysis of the rock core, the team found that it had much lower levels of a mineral called pyroxene compared to other mantle samples collected from around the world. This suggests that this particular bit of the mantle has undergone lots of melting in the past, which has depleted the pyroxene. But to be honest, we've barely scratched the surface of what we can learn from this rock core. In the future, one of the team members I spoke to wants to reconstruct this melting process, which can ultimately help us understand how the mantle melts and how that mantle material rises to the surface to feed oceanic volcanoes. Microbiologists are also hoping to examine markers of life along the rock core, so back to that heat and methane and seawater combination. They have questions like how did the microbes get there and how deep beneath the seafloor could such life have gotten? So all in all, again, lots of exciting questions to be answered. And this drill hole is going to be a very important reference section for science from many branches in years to come.
It's so amazing that even with all the sophistication of science, you can't beat drilling a massive hole in the Earth to answer some fundamental questions.
All right, up next, the archaeological record is full of the bones of early humans. Some are direct ancestors, others more like cousins. And one group of these humans evolved to be much smaller than the others, the so-called hobbits, Homo floresiensis. The question of when and why the Homo floresiensis lineage diminished in stature has also been hotly debated. But Sam Wong is here with a new discovery that might help us piece together their evolutionary story. Hey, Sam.
Hi.
All right, so when we are talking about Homo floresiensis, how long ago did they live? Where do they fit in our family tree?
Yeah, so listeners might remember that we discovered these Homo floresiensis in 2004 on the island of Flores in Indonesia. And they were a little over a metre tall. So as you said, people nicknamed them the Hobbits. And the initial dating suggested that they lived as recently as 13,000 years ago, but that's been revised. So now the bones are thought to be about 50 to 90,000 years old. And there's an ongoing debate about where they fit into the human family tree. So the most widely accepted theory is that they evolved from Homo erectus, which is a species that evolved in Africa about 2 million years ago, and they had spread all over Asia by 1 million years ago. The idea is some of them found their way to Flores and then they evolved to get smaller, which many animals do on islands where food is limited and there's not many predators around. But some scientists think that they evolved from an older human species that left Africa earlier, and they evolved to get small more gradually.
So how old these fossils are might tell us a lot about what their evolutionary pace was, I guess. Has there been any kind of new discovery that might help us with this picture?
Yeah, so actually in 2016, Yosuke Kaifu at the University of Tokyo and his colleagues uncovered some hominin remains from another site on Flores called Mata Menge. And they included a part of a skull, a piece of jawbone, and 6 teeth. And these remains are about 700,000 years old, so the obvious interpretation was that the Mata Menge hominins were the ancestors of the hobbits. But because the remains were so fragmentary, it wasn't possible to be confident. Now the same team has described some new fossils, some teeth and a piece of an arm bone, which have enabled them to estimate the body size of this older hominin. And they came up with a best estimate of 1 metre, which is slightly smaller than Homo floresiensis even, and that would make them the smallest hominins that we've ever found, assuming the arm bone is from a typical adult. And they do believe it's an adult based on certain features of the bone microstructure.
That's really cool, the hobbits to the hobbits. Really nice. So we've got these short-statured early humans on the same island, and they're probably a direct ancestor of Homo floresiensis, as you say. What does that mean for the evolutionary story of the hobbits?
Well, Kaifu says that the new evidence supports the idea that they evolved from Homo erectus, which is the more widely accepted theory, as opposed to an older, unknown human ancestor. Homo erectus fossils have been found in Java in Indonesia from 1 million years ago, and his team say that the teeth from Flores are very similar to the Javan Homo erectus fossils. So that would mean these humans became small quite quickly after arriving in Flores, maybe within 300,000 years or so, and they remained small for a long time.
300,000 years, that's pretty quick in evolutionary terms, right? But also with these ancient human stories, there's often so little to go on. We're talking about fragments, and so there's often a few differing opinions about how to interpret them. Is that also the case here?
Yes, it is, yeah. Mike Marshall, who covered this story for us, he also spoke to Debbie Argue at the Australian National University, and she points out that the Mata Menge teeth don't look that similar to the teeth from the later Homo floresiensis. So there's no clear reason to think that this fossil is actually the hobbits' ancestors. She thinks we should be instead considering the possibility that the Mata Menge hominins are a new short-statured species, and that both these ones and Homo floresiensis are descended from an older, mysterious hominin group that left Africa earlier.
Love an older, mysterious hominin group. Who are they?
All right, time for a quick break to offer you the vacation of a lifetime. Have you ever wanted to travel the universe, see the sights of the Milky Way, wander outer space? Now you can, if we can just find a way to send the sun on walkabout such that it takes Earth and the rest of the solar system with it. You know, no big deal. Yes, this is the series finale of Dead Planet Society. We will be letting Chelsea and Leia rest for a while now after several months of hard work breaking things in the cosmos.
That series finale is already in your feed, ready to listen to. And if you'd rather stay home this month, maybe on the couch with a good TV show, next week's Culture Lab is a roundup of the year's best TV so far. We've got Time Bandits, Supercell, and the best documentaries of the season. Stay tuned for next Tuesday when that'll drop into your feed. Next up, stock traders famously are always looking to get an edge over each other. If you can make trades faster, you can often make more money. But the speed limit of the universe being what it is, the speed of light, All that means is that there's only so quick you can get in these trades. That is, until now. Researchers have looked into if traders using a strange phenomenon called quantum telepathy could have an edge over others. And remarkably, the answer appears to be yes. Carmela Padovich-Callahan is here to explain. Hi, Carmela.
Hello.
So talk us through this one. What is going on?
Right. So the researchers I spoke to set up this fictional but very plausible scenario where there's a trader who operates on two different stock exchanges, and they sort of try to take a very real-world example. So the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, which are 56.3 kilometers apart in real life. And we assume, or the researchers assume, that the trader has a physical server at each exchange, and each server can buy and it can sell, and how it makes those decisions depends on the data it gets at its respective exchange. And in this scenario, we assume that the kind of trading they're doing is high-frequency trading. So you're making trade decisions extremely quickly. So microseconds, like a millionth of a second is enough for a buy or a sell to happen. So if you have two servers, sometimes you will want them to coordinate. So both sell and both buy or something like that. And conventionally, the only way to make them coordinate in real time would be for them to contact each other, like using the internet, in which case that communication would take some time, right? You have to send a light signal through a fiber optic cable between them. And because they're 56.3 kilometers apart, the speed of light is fixed. So it would take about 188 microseconds for the two servers to actually communicate. And in that time, in the 188 microseconds, you could make dozens, maybe hundreds of trades. So the market could change before the two servers manage to coordinate what they're doing. So to get an edge, you want to eliminate this time delay. How do you do that? You give up on using light and you go full on with quantum telepathy.
Go quantum.
There's always some quantum trick to all of these things. So quantum telepathy, I'm a little bit rusty on what that is. Can you remind us what it is? And, is it a real thing or is it a thing researchers have made up?
Yeah, it's a real thing. It's an idea that's been kicking for a while. It used to be called pseudo-telepathy, sort of to underline that it's not telepathy in the sort of fantasy type of sense. But it is sort of about communicating without having to exchange a signal. So, if you're imagining two people using regular telepathy, like they are like exchanging thoughts without having to open their mouth, like maybe they're just like staring at each other very intently, but there's like no like physical thing exchanged between them. So quantum telepathy is a similar idea where you would have two agents coordinate behavior without having to exchange information through some conventional communication channels. So no light signal, no sound signal, nothing like that. In fact, they would use what's sometimes called spooky action at a distance. So two particles influencing each other across distances in a very short amount of time through quantum effects.
All right, so if you use quantum telepathy, you would get an advantage by being able to coordinate your trades more quickly than everyone else. That does seem like a big deal. But is this actually feasible on the tech side of things? Is this something that's been theorized, but we don't actually have the machinery in which to make it work on a level where you can just bring it into the financial market?
Yeah, I think this is the most shocking part of this story is that I spoke to a couple of researchers and one of them just straight up told me that, if you wanted to set up a company that would trade by using these quantum effects, you could do it within a year because the technology basically exists already. So earlier when I said that, you would want to use spooky action at a distance, the sort of underlying phenomenon underneath that is quantum entanglement. And what you would need to implement a telepathy scheme is to have two entangled particles, and each stock exchange would get one. So each server would just have a half of a pair of entangled particles. And the way entanglement works is that if you interact with one of the particles of the pair, the other one immediately gets influenced by that. So they coordinate nearly instantaneously. And we've had experiments that have tested this coordination between entangled particles basically since the 1960s and 70s. So at this point, because people have been testing these entanglement effects for so long, you can just go to a company and buy a source of entangled quantum particles. It will come in a box and you just have to know how to program it.
So maybe not quite as simple as like the Radio Shack off the shelf, but close enough that someone could just go out and do it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you sort of have to do some market research on quantum technology suppliers and figure out, like, do you like integrated photonics, or do you like ultra cold atoms, or, what's your favorite? But it's not beyond what you could figure out without that much money or background. Like, there are plenty of labs that just buy stuff like this for experiments.
All right. So that's 50 years of technology development already supporting this happening. How come no one's already doing this? And if so, would it even be legal?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge question. I immediately had this idea, too, of, if the tech is there, how come we haven't tried it? Especially because, there's so much interest in things like quantum computing, where the tech is still being developed, where we're sort of still trying to figure out how to build the chips. So this seems like a way more accessible use case. But I think part of the story is that the theory behind this, you have to know a little bit of quantum game theory, and you have to sort of have rethought some of these old experiments. And it just doesn't seem like a lot of people are very invested in it just yet. However, the folks who have thought about this are also aware that, because it could be so immediately feasible, there probably will be regulation or should be regulation. And actually, for the story, we did try to reach out to the FTC and the SEC, which are regulatory agencies here in the United States, and they declined to comment. But I would wager that, the first company to implement a scheme like this would have such a huge advantage that, like, some regulator out there is thinking about it.
Well, now that we're talking about it, I'm sure there are going to be a million people going out and doing this immediately, and thus changing the need for laws. Come on, it's a new scientist bump.
Well, if our readers get rich on the stock market, I would like for them to write to me, and we can discuss royalties.
Many people would love another planet to escape to, given, some things are going on down here. But as they say, there is no planet B. Even our closest option, Mars, is currently a harsh impossibility. But a new proposal from a team of researchers now suggests that making Mars a little bit more livable might actually be easier than we think. Alex Wilkins is here. Hey, Alex, what's the story?
Hey, yeah, so as you suggest, it might be a little bit more livable than we think. There's this idea called terraforming, which is making other planets more livable or making them more Earth-like. And the idea's got a really long history. The famous astronomer Carl Sagan once suggested vaporizing the northern Martian ice caps, which would produce more liquid water and make it more habitable. And he suggested that all the way back in the 1970s. But most terraforming ideas involve transporting loads of stuff from Earth, like huge quantities of methane or enormous reflective space mirrors, which is all wildly expensive and really quite unworkable. But there's this new paper from researchers at the University of Chicago which takes a different approach and suggests mining the material on Mars itself, extracting iron or aluminium and fashioning it into tiny micrometer-length rods, a little bit like glitter, and releasing it into the upper atmosphere.
All right, I do love a judicious application of some glitter. Is that how we're making Mars more Earth-like? We're just making it sparklier?
Exactly. A sparkly Mars is the key to a livable Mars.
Well, all right. So what's the glitter actually doing in the atmosphere besides, again, possibly sparkling?
Yeah, so the idea behind this glittery idea is that you release it near the surface and it'll be a bit like dust, and it will float up to the upper atmosphere where it would then sit. It would trap heat coming up from the surface and also allow sunlight through and kind of send that through to the Martian surface as well. And this would all result in a net heating. The researchers modeled how these rods responded to light and radiation and then fed that information into climate simulations. And what they found was that Mars's surface temperature would increase by about 30 degrees. This wouldn't be enough to warm all of Mars. It can get pretty frosty up there, get down to about minus 153 degrees centigrade. That's minus 225 degrees Fahrenheit. But in some regions, it would be enough to melt frozen water and frozen carbon dioxide, which would also help increase the temperature and pressure even more.
I must admit, it doesn't sound that habitable when you're talking about minus 153 degrees Celsius, even if you get a little bit warmer, 30 degrees warmer. How habitable is it?
Yeah, so I think you would still need quite a few warm clothes. It would be pretty cold, as you suggest, and probably still be freezing in some pockets. But there would also be places that would have liquid water. But as you suggest, there are plenty of reasons that would make it really quite unsuitable, even aside from the temperature. So you'd still have high intensity UV rays, poisonous chemicals in the soil, not enough oxygen. But what that warmth might do is make it habitable enough for microbes that can survive in extreme conditions. And these microbes could be oxygen-producing ones, just like the ones that transformed Earth's atmosphere billions of years ago.
Okay, so all that effort for a few microbes. The actual plan itself, kind of releasing all the glitter, is that even feasible? How hard would it be engineering-wise?
So I think it's feasible, but very hard. So the authors calculated how many of these tiny particles you'd need, and they found that the rate would be about 30 garden sprinklers worth working round the clock. Now that's equivalent to around 700,000 cubic meters of metal per year to achieve this required warming, and that equates to around 1% of Earth's total metal production. The authors point out that that's a lot less than previous proposals, and it works out at 5,000 times more efficient than other methods, but it's obviously still a lot and a huge engineering challenge. You'd have to carve out a pretty large mine on Mars and have a material processing facility, and so far all we've been able to do is land tiny rovers.
I mean, yeah, that sounds like a huge challenge, and, we would need human beings probably doing a lot of this mining, and even then messing with another planet's atmosphere also just sounds potentially risky, even if no one human is living there.
Yeah, it's a definite risk. So the authors stressed to me that there wasn't any possibility of runaway climate change here because the glitter clouds would eventually fall out of the atmosphere, and once you turn off the taps, the heating should stop. But an outside scientist who wasn't involved with the work that I spoke with, he pointed out that it could still potentially mess up Mars's pristine chemical environment, and there are significant ethical questions around whether we should alter the atmosphere of another planet, especially one that we know so little about and that could contain all this interesting information about the solar system.
Every week, we have to sort through this kind of huge pile of amazing stories that New Scientist journalists have written, knowing that we won't have time to cover them all on this podcast. And then we try to sneak a few last ones in at the very final minute. This week, there were some very tempting entries in the creature category, starting with the microbes that, it turns out, inhabit your microwave, Tim.
No. I feel like this is going to be quite gross, isn't it? I mean, I must admit, I don't clean my microwave that often. I don't want to have to start doing that.
Well, I do have news for you. A new survey of microwaves in homes, laboratories, and shared cafeterias is now suggesting that bacteria can, in fact, make a home in your microwave. And the reason this is maybe a little surprising, right, is that a microwave is also a constant source of heat and irradiation, not the most friendly place. But a research team in Spain found that there are more than 700 different species in their survey of a couple dozen microwaves. So many of these are actually quite similar to the ones that ride around on our hands, maybe not surprisingly.
Yeah, that is kind of gross. But then if they're the ones that are on our hands, I've had my hands all my life. They seem to mostly not kill me. So are these bacteria, are they all right?
Yeah, mostly they're all right. We probably shouldn't be too surprised about that. Bacteria can survive in harsh environments. They seem to exist in every place on Earth, including, as we discussed, below the seafloor. It's really just a matter of which ones might make us sick. And while some of the species they found do pose a health risk, the research team did note that they don't seem to represent a new source of risk in your kitchen. So, all the other surfaces in your kitchen are still much more likely to be hospitable to pathogenic bacteria. And if you do clean your microwave, Tim, as often as you clean your other surfaces in your kitchen, you have nothing to worry about.
Okay, absolutely nothing to worry about. All right, I've got one about this study that involves some horse babies, so it's pretty cute. As you know, the Olympics are on at the moment, and there's been some horse events, and of course there's been some controversy around those. But separately, scientists have learned that a baby horse's microbiome may be crucial to how well it does as a racehorse when it grows up, especially in terms of avoiding injuries and having healthy lungs.
And I assume we're talking about the gut microbiome. This sounds like a very cute, but also maybe poop-filled study if it involves baby horses.
Yes, it is one of those. It's the gut microbiome, and as you guessed, there was a lot of wading through horse poo samples in this research. Basically, the researchers followed baby horses throughout the first 3 years of their lives, and it looks like the crucial window for a baby horse to develop a good, diverse microbiome is in the first 2 months of its life, whilst they're still nursing from their mothers. And after that, they start to eat grass more, and that seems to make a bit less of a difference to their overall microbiome. Mm-hmm. And Those horses that had the most microbial diversity in their first 2 months, those are the ones that went on to do better at races and to have fewer soft tissue and respiratory issues. The thinking is that this early microbiome may prime the horse's immune system in some kind of specific way that relates to athletic performance later in life.
All right, one last one. I am blessed to sit near physics reporter Carmelo Padovich-Callahan in the New York office, who just left us another great story. And I got to overhear them working on a different story this week that involves phrases like spiral entombment, ultra-fast worm, undulating blob, and my favorite, leeches.
Oh yeah, I know Undulating Blob. I've seen him around. He's that guy. Strange guy. He's always up, he's
Undulating
always down.
Bob, we call him.
So go on, talk us through this story then. This sounds like a fascinating one.
Right. So this is a study of how leeches are able to hunt worms called blackworms, which are usually very good at getting away from predators. And one of the blackworm strategies involves forming this big old tangled ball of worms, making it very hard for predators to pick them off. But leeches can still manage it. The team analyzed more than a dozen videos of leeches attacking these big balls of worms, and they had a really cool trick, which is to kind of spiral themselves around a worm with its whole body, like a bear hug, but, leechy and spirally. And then they do what leeches everywhere are known for, which is jab the worm with their mouth appendage and drink all the tasty worm juices out of them. And maybe this is obvious, but bigger leeches also seem more successful at this trick, maybe because they just had sort of more length and more body to wrap around their prey.
That's it for this week. If you like this show and think more people should know about us, please do give us a 5-star rating or even a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
We've got more fascinating stories from New Scientist on our website at newscientist.com. Just head over there and drink up all the tasty news juice we've got. We'll be back next week. Bye for now.
Bye.
This podcast is produced by OG Podcasts. Find out more at ogpodcasts.co.uk.